On a somber, silent patch of consecrated ground, Julian Maxwell, a prominent black entrepreneur with a formidable global portfolio, knelt. His imposing stature was momentarily humbled, his shoulders heaving with a sorrow that felt absolute. Before him stood the polished granite marker dedicated to his late daughter. Tears of crushing despair fell onto the cold inscription, an outward manifestation of the void in his soul. Yet Julian remained tragically unaware. Just a handful of feet away, concealed by the dense canopy of an ancient oak, the 9-year-old child believed to be ashes was watching him. She was frail, cold, and utterly alone, a living testament to a conspiracy, clutching a devastating truth. She had survived 6 months of captivity. Her sudden presence was either a miracle or the opening salvo in a new, lethal chapter of betrayal. Julian Maxwell's entire existence was a narrative of ascent. Starting from the concrete jungle, the son of a transit worker and a hospital aide, he had fiercely carved his way through institutional bias and economic hardship to establish himself as one of the leading black venture capitalists and property owners in the nation. His firm, Maxwell Ventures, controlled luxury real estate across 13 states, earning him persistent recognition in global finance circles. Now, however, all that wealth and acclaim meant nothing. Half a year had passed since a massive fire had consumed the auxiliary structure on his sprawling estate. By the time emergency crews extinguished the blaze, forensic evidence pointed conclusively to the remains being those of his 9-year-old daughter, Chloe. The fire marshal's official conclusion attributed the tragedy to faulty wiring. The memorial service saw hundreds in attendance, a testament to Julian's standing. But Julian, the man who had always bent the world to his will, was left utterly broken. He had lost significant weight since the funeral. His formerly commanding presence was now gaunt, his bespoke suits draping loosely over shoulders that had forgotten how to bear the weight of leadership. He had not returned to his executive office. His elder cousin, Alex, managed the firm's daily operations, while his wife, Serena, oversaw the household, meticulously ensuring Julian ate, rested, and consumed his prescribed medicines. Every Saturday morning, a pilgrimage he could not break, Julian drove to Willow Creek Memorial Park. He would drop to his knees before the small stone etched with his daughter's name, Chloe Rose Maxwell, our beloved light, age 9. "I am so sorry, sweetheart," he would choke out, his voice ravaged. "Your father failed to keep you safe." The agonizing reality Julian was blind to was that the child he mourned was not resting beneath that soil. Chloe was concealed just 20 feet away, observing his heartbreaking display of grief. Chloe had endured 6 months as a hostage in a remote, dilapidated cabin deep within the surrounding wilderness, hours from the city's lights. Her prison was a cramped space with a meager cot, a waste pail, and a boarded-up window. A man she only knew as the Keeper delivered tasteless food twice a day, locking the door with a loud final click. She knew nothing of his identity or her location, only the chilling memory of being dragged from her bed on the night of the fire, forcibly sedated and transported to this desolate place. For 6 months, fear had been Chloe's teacher, sharpening her senses far beyond her age. She learned that the Keeper consumed vast quantities of liquor on Friday nights, frequently collapsing into a drunken stupor before midnight. She memorized the cadence of his heavy boots, the distinct sound of his snoring, and the precise location of every creaking board leading to the back exit. 9 years old, yet 6 months of sheer terror had forged her into a survivor. 3 weeks prior, a crucial error by her captor had provided the opportunity. The Keeper, in a drunken haze, dropped his key, which slid under the door and into her cell. Chloe immediately snatched it and hid it beneath her cot mattress, waiting for the optimal moment. Last night was it. She slipped silently through the back door while the Keeper snored, the noxious fumes of cheap whiskey filling the air. She bolted into the deep woods, thorns tearing at her cheeks and arms, her bare feet cut and bleeding on sharp stones and roots. She had no communication device, no map, and no idea of her destination, but she clung to the few visual cues from her transfer, the shape of the ridges, the faint hum of distant highway traffic, and the pattern of the stars above. By sunrise, she reached the outskirts of the metropolitan area. Exhausted, weak from hunger, and constantly looking over her shoulder, Chloe had one imperative: locate her father. But returning to their lavish home was unthinkable. During her imprisonment, she had overheard fragmented discussions, cryptic phone calls between the keeper and a person she addressed as the chief. On one occasion, a woman's voice, smooth, cold, and professional, on speakerphone. Chloe recognized that voice instantly. It belonged to Serena, her stepmother. A conversation overheard just 2 weeks ago had clarified the horror. His condition is declining quickly. The regimen is achieving the desired results. Perhaps 2 months remaining, possibly less. Good, Serena replied, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. When he expires, the full estate transfers. Just ensure the girl remains secure. She is our contingency. Chloe didn't grasp the medical jargon, but the intention was terrifyingly clear. Her father was being slowly murdered. Her stepmother and an unknown accomplice were orchestrating his death for financial gain, while keeping Chloe alive as a form of insurance. Involving law enforcement was too risky. A 9-year-old child covered in dirt and scratches with zero concrete proof would be dismissed. The police would contact Serena, she would retrieve Chloe, and this time the disappearance would be final. So Chloe sought the only place she knew her father would be, the cemetery where his grief was centered. Now, hiding behind the oak, she watched him break. The man who had been her personal fortress now appeared utterly fragile. Then Julian spoke the words that galvanized her. "I can't bear this emptiness anymore, Chloe," he murmured to the grave. "I have nothing left. Maybe it is time I join you." His resignation struck Chloe like a physical blow. Her father was abandoning the fight. If she didn't act now, she would lose him not to Serena's poison, but to his own terminal despair. She emerged from the massive shadow of the tree. "Daddy?" The word was barely audible, yet in the profound silence of the cemetery, it resonated like a thunderclap. Julian's entire body seized. For a prolonged, suspended moment, he was motionless, unable to accept what he heard. That voice was the soundtrack to his nightly dreams. It was the echo in his empty house. It could not be real. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned, and there she was, emaciated, unkempt, her clothes shredded, yet undeniably, impossibly Chloe. Chloe! The name was a strangled cry of raw disbelief. "It's me, Daddy. I'm really here." Julian scrambled to his feet, stumbling in his haste. He covered the short distance in 3 unsteady paces and sank to his knees, his hands hovering over her shoulders, terrified she would vaporize before his eyes. "I must be dreaming. This is hallucination." Chloe grasped his shaking hands and pressed them against her own, a warm, tangible, tear-streaked face. "I'm real, Daddy. I survived. They took me and held me captive, but I escaped. I'm home." Julian's control imploded. He crushed his daughter against him, his body racked by sobs that transcended grief, a sound of pure, overwhelming euphoria mixed with corrosive rage and desperate love. "My little girl," he repeated endlessly. "Dear God, my little girl." They clung together for an eternity, father and daughter resurrected on the site of a lie. When Julian finally pulled back, his eyes were red and swollen, but the look of brokenness was gone. In its place was a primal, dangerous intensity. "Who committed this?" His voice was low, lethal. "Who kidnapped you? I will find them. I swear I will end them myself." "Daddy, listen to my warning." Chloe gripped his jacket tightly. "It was Serena and another man. I heard his voice. They are killing you. The medicine she gives you, the tea, it's slow-acting poison. They want your money." Julian's face turned corpse pale. "Serena? That is impossible. She has done nothing but care for me. She has been murdering you," Chloe interrupted, her small voice imbued with grim conviction. "I heard them. They said a few more months left. Daddy, you must believe what I am telling you." For a drawn-out moment, Julian simply stared at his daughter. The girl he had lost was innocent and protected. The girl before him now carried the haunted eyes of a veteran. He felt a dreadful certainty. He believed every single word.
"We go to the police immediately," he stated, rising. "No," Chloe grabbed his sleeve, desperate. "Daddy, we can't. If they know I'm alive, they will execute us both. They have operatives. The man who held me captive will alert them. They are already searching. If we return home, if we notify anyone." She left the implication hanging. Julian's rage was tempered by chilling realization. His daughter was correct. He could not simply expose Serena and her accomplice. They had faked a death, staged a fire, and imprisoned a child. They possessed the capacity for absolute violence. "What is the alternative?" he whispered. Chloe looked up at him, displaying an unnerving spark of his own tenacity. "We must outsmart them," she said. "We need them to think their plan is flawless, and then we destroy them from the inside." Julian gazed at the child who had survived the unthinkable. He knelt again. "I spent 6 months wanting to die. You survived."
You came back, and now you demand a fight. He hugged her fiercely. I will not allow them to harm you again, Chloe. We are going to make them pay for every single injury, and we will do it together. Julian maneuvered his vehicle away from the memorial park using deserted access roads, his brain cycling through potential sanctuaries. Home was a trap. A public hotel meant inevitable detection. Chloe's face was too recognizable. He required absolute, uncompromised loyalty. That loyalty belonged to only one person, Raymond Ray Vance, his trusted corporate counsel of 2 decades. Their association had begun when Julian was struggling to finance his first major development, and Ray was a young, sharp lawyer eager to prove his worth. Their professional alliance had evolved into a deep, resilient friendship built on shared secrets and mutual respect. Julian contacted Ray from an isolated gas station payphone, refusing to use his traceable cell. I require an urgent private meeting, Julian instructed, cutting to the chase. 0 questions, 0 explanations. Just meet me at the agreed-upon location. Ray, known for his methodical nature, simply replied, "Location received." An hour later, Ray's luxury SUV arrived at the loading dock of a shuttered industrial complex. When he stepped out and saw Julian standing next to a small, disheveled child, his face went slack with shock. "My God, Julian," Ray gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that—" "It's Chloe," Julian confirmed, his voice devoid of warmth. "She is alive. She was held captive for 6 months, and the conspirators who staged her death are the same people systematically poisoning me." Julian laid out the entire sickening account, the abduction, the staged fire, Chloe's testimony, and the cold, undeniable evidence pointing to Serena. As Julian spoke, Ray's expression hardened from shock into cold, lawyerly fury. "Immediate police involvement means Serena is notified within minutes," Ray stated once Julian finished the grim recital. "It's protocol for missing persons returned. And you are right, without indisputable evidence, it becomes the testimony of an unstable widower recovering from trauma against a grieving widow's protestations of innocence." "What is the path forward?" Julian demanded. Ray fell silent, his brilliant legal mind constructing scenarios and calculating risks. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "We construct a perfect entrapment. One single error, Julian, and you both forfeit your lives." The elaborate counterplan solidified over the following hours. Chloe would be housed in Ray's remote city apartment, a secure, off-the-books bolt hole known to only a few, where she would be invisible to the outside world. Julian would return to the mansion and resume his charade as the failing, grief-stricken husband. "You must play the role flawlessly," Ray coached him. "You are weakening. You are consumed by sorrow. Let Serena maintain her absolute confidence in the plan. But every substance she provides, drink, food, medication, you must successfully discard, leaving no trace. Then we commence the acquisition of evidence.
I will supply you with specialized recording tools, micro cameras, embedded audio devices. We document everything, and when the proof is undeniable, Ray's eyes bored into Julian's, you are going to officially perish. Julian understood the gravity instantly, a simulated death. Serena and her accomplice were anticipating his passing to trigger the inheritance. A sudden, certified death would provoke them into a rapid, careless rush to claim his assets. That moment of overconfidence would be their undoing. The risk was terrifying, but it was the only strategy that promised both protection for Chloe and total victory. Julian knelt before Chloe, who listened with quiet, unnerving focus. I must go back into the lion's den. I have to pretend this never happened. It may take weeks, and you will be forced to wait here, isolated. I know, after your ordeal, this is the hardest thing I could ask. Chloe's eyes welled, but her voice was steady. I survived 6 months in that solitary room, Daddy. I can wait a few more weeks if it guarantees we win the final battle. Julian embraced her, fighting back the tremor in his own voice. His 9-year-old possessed a terrifying inner strength. I will come to you whenever I can safely slip away. I promise, this nightmare will end. I swear it will end with their ruin. The next 3 weeks were a trial of psychological endurance for Julian. He returned home and resumed his devastating performance. Serena greeted him with practiced, delicate sympathy, her soft touch concealing the black heart beneath. She offered him her special, soothing teas each morning and prepared his light supper each evening. Julian successfully thwarted her lethal attempts, pouring the liquid into the soil of large interior plants when her attention wandered, scraping the food into disposable napkins and flushing them down the toilet. He strategically placed the sophisticated devices Ray had provided, tiny lenses concealed in smoke detectors, decorative frames, and inconspicuous power outlets. He wore a high-fidelity recorder whenever Serena was nearby. Slowly, painstakingly, the evidence mounted. He recorded Serena's hushed phone calls to Alex, his cousin, discussing the diminishing timeline of Julian's life. He recorded her angry tirades about the tedious delay, about her boredom playing the role of the devoted caretaker. He photographed the unlabeled bottles of liquid hidden in a locked cabinet. But the most damning confirmation arrived 10 days in, coinciding with a visit from Alex Maxwell, Julian's own cousin. Julian had always known Alex harbored a bitter envy. Julian was the success. Alex was the chronic underachiever. Out of a misguided sense of obligation, Julian installed Alex as chief operating officer. He never imagined that resentment could mutate into murderous intent. But there it was, captured on the hidden audio, crystal clear. Alex and Serena, relaxing in the parlor, convinced Julian was incapacitated upstairs, finalizing their plans. The medical report confirms rapid decline, a month, maybe 6 weeks at the absolute latest. Finally, Alex replied, impatience obvious. I'm sick of waiting. Once he is cremated and the estate is transferred, we eliminate the contingency, the girl. She's a major loose end. We'll handle her once the funds are secured. For now, she's our failsafe. Julian listened to the recording that night in Ray's car, his entire body convulsing with a cold, focused fury. His own blood relative, his own wife, conspiring to execute him and subsequently murder his surviving child, all for financial control. I want them completely obliterated, Julian said, his voice dangerously low. And they will be, Ray affirmed, but this must be executed perfectly. We destroy them in a manner from which they can never recover.
3 weeks after Chloe's heroic return, Julian Maxwell was officially pronounced deceased. The precise execution of the plan was masterful. Ray had secured the cooperation of a trustworthy physician, Dr. Nelson, a man who owed Julian a life-altering favor. Together, they choreographed a perfect, medically convincing cardiac event within the Maxwell home. Serena executed a performance of flawless, panicked grief while calling the emergency line. Paramedics rushed the victim to a prearranged hospital.
2 agonizing hours later, Dr. Nelson emerged, delivering the grim public news. Julian Maxwell had suffered a catastrophic heart failure. Despite all resuscitation efforts, he could not be revived. The death certificate was issued. To preempt any invasive autopsy that might reveal Julian's healthy status, the remains were quickly designated for cremation. The news went viral within the hour. Black entrepreneur Julian Maxwell, dead at 45, the news wires declared. Real estate titan succumbs to cardiac arrest following months of grief over daughter's death. Serena excelled in her role. She wore deep black. She wept for the cameras. She gave tearful interviews about her husband's shattered spirit, asserting he had simply faded away after losing Chloe, despite her tireless efforts to save him. Alex stood by her side at the televised address, his face a picture of constrained sorrow, speaking of the brother he adored. The world offered condolences, social media was flooded with tributes, and Serena and Alex promptly initiated the legal process to claim the vast estate. In Ray's secured apartment, Chloe watched the broadcast, her father beside her, very much alive. "They genuinely believe they have achieved victory," Julian noted, watching Serena's Oscar-worthy display. Chloe gripped his arm. "They haven't." "No," Julian confirmed, a lethal finality in his tone. "They have not." The waiting was excruciating. From his hidden location, Julian monitored Serena and Alex through the cameras still transmitting inside the mansion. He watched them toast their success with champagne the night after his memorial service. He listened as they openly discussed liquidating key assets, how they would divide the enormous profits, and the opulent new lives they envisioned. More significantly, he observed them becoming arrogantly careless. With Julian supposedly gone, they spoke freely about their crimes. They contacted the keeper, the man who had held Chloe, instructing him to destroy the remote cabin. They established the timeline for dealing with Chloe once the asset transfer was complete. Julian recorded every damning word. Ray finalized the overwhelming legal case. The date for the formal transfer of inheritance was set. For Chloe, those final 2 weeks of hiding were a unique form of torment. She was secure and loved, but often alone while the men worked. The trauma persisted in nightly vivid dreams, the locked room, the heavy footsteps, the chilling sound of the key turning. She would wake up gasping, reaching for her father, constantly reminding herself of her freedom. But the fear of failure was a cold anchor in her stomach. What if the elaborate deception failed? What if Serena somehow realized the truth? What if an unexpected event turned her father's staged death into a terrifying reality? She kept these anxieties internal. Her father was waging war. She would not add to his psychological burden. She waited, watching the funeral coverage, counting down to the confrontation. The day of the inheritance hearing arrived. It was held in the grand, historic courthouse, a fortress of justice. Media vans swarmed the street. Reporters clamored for vantage points. The death and subsequent disposition of a black billionaire's fortune was a national spectacle. Inside the courtroom, Serena was seated at the claimant's table, impeccably dressed in dark couture, delicately touching her eyes with a fine silk cloth. Alex sat beside her, appropriately somber. Their attorneys presented the completed legal package, the last will, the certified death certificate, and the documentation of their marital and fraternal claims. The judge reviewed the voluminous file carefully. All procedures appeared satisfied. Julian Maxwell had passed away, and his wife and cousin were the legal heirs. "If there are no further challenges," the judge announced, his voice carrying authority, "I am prepared to issue the order authorizing the transfer of assets to the surviving family members." Serena reached for the pen to sign the decree. Her hand was perfectly steady. The end had arrived. Julian was cremated dust. Chloe was neutralized. The fortune she had plotted to acquire for years was finally within her grasp. She signed her name with deliberate precision. Alex signed after her, a fleeting, triumphant smile crossing his face. The judge reached for his official sealing stamp, and the courtroom doors exploded open. Every head turned, cameras flashed wildly. Serena's pen skittered across the polished wood as the blood drained entirely from her face. Julian Maxwell stood in the doorway, undeniably alive, his presence a towering monument of rage. Beside him, holding his hand, was Chloe, the daughter everyone believed had burned 6 months prior. "I believe," Julian declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a cleaver, "there may be significant challenges to the proceedings." The courtroom dissolved into instant pandemonium. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs strobed constantly. Julian's eyes remained fixed on Serena and Alex, who were paralyzed at their table, like figures carved from ice. Ray Vance followed Julian inside, accompanied by 2 federal marshals and a massive file of documents. He approached the bench. "Your Honor, I represent Julian Maxwell, who is, as you can see, very much alive. I present overwhelming evidence that Serena Maxwell and Alex Maxwell conspired to kidnap his daughter, fake her death, and systematically poison Mr. Maxwell to fraudulently inherit his entire estate. We possess video recordings, full audio confessions, and the full testimony of their hired associate." He placed the heavy file on the bench. "We request that both defendants be taken into custody immediately on charges of attempted murder and kidnapping." Serena finally broke. She leapt to her feet, her composure utterly gone. "This is insane," she shrieked hysterically. "That is not possible. He is dead. She is dead. I saw her perish." "Did you, Serena? Or did you just confidently assume your murderous plans had worked?" He looked at Alex, who was motionless, unable to speak. "You were willing to destroy me, Alex, your own family, for money." Alex's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The marshals moved quickly. One approached Serena, who was backing away, screaming denials. The other moved for Alex, who offered no resistance, his face a blank canvas of absolute shock. As the cuffs clicked shut around Serena's wrists, she twisted towards Julian, her mask of sophistication dissolving into pure, feral hate. "You deserved to die," she spat. "You were meant to expire. This fortune was rightfully mine." Julian remained silent. He simply pulled Chloe closer, shielding her from the spectacle, and watched the woman who had sought to annihilate their family dragged away. The cameras captured the definitive moment of their downfall. By the end of the day, the story would be a global phenomenon. But in that moment of triumphant chaos, Julian felt only the warmth of Chloe's hand. They had won.
In the aftermath of the explosive courtroom showdown, the gears of justice began to grind. The detailed evidence provided by Julian, coupled with the captured keeper's full confession, ensured a rapid path to prosecution. Serena and Alex, stripped of their immense resources and social influence, were remanded without bail. The once vaunted co-conspirators were now reduced to frightened, isolated inmates, facing the crushing certainty of a life sentence. The chilling details of their mercenary plot, the engineered fire, the calculated poisoning, the calculated cruelty toward Chloe, were public knowledge, transforming public shock into universal contempt. Julian, having achieved his primary objective, withdrew completely from the media frenzy. He resigned his executive role at Maxwell Ventures, installing Ray Vance as the interim leader to manage the company's transition. His priorities were irrevocably altered. Family healing superseded financial empire. He sold the opulent mansion, removing the last structural residue of Serena's treachery. He acquired a private, architecturally significant residence far removed from the city, a secure haven offering Chloe the privacy and emotional space she needed to heal. Their new existence was deliberately minimal and focused inward. Chloe began intensive therapeutic sessions with a specialist in childhood trauma. Julian also sought discreet counseling, finally addressing his own acute symptoms, the overwhelming guilt for his misplaced trust, and the psychological devastation of his near-death experience. This phase was not about continuing the revenge narrative, but about the grueling, necessary work of rebuilding their emotional foundation. Chloe slowly reclaimed a sense of safety within her own 4 walls, and Julian learned to find deep satisfaction not in billion-dollar deals, but in the mundane, precious rhythm of co-parenting. The first days in the new home were marked by an intense, lingering tension. While the physical space was clean and untouched by Serena, the emotional scars traveled with them. Chloe was hypersensitive to silence, often checking the locks and windows, a habit born from her long imprisonment. Julian, conversely, found himself struggling to sleep unless he could physically hear Chloe breathing nearby. One evening, Chloe broke down, not in fear, but in exhaustion. She confessed she kept expecting to hear the metallic click of the door locking her in. Julian, seeing the deep residual fear, did not offer false comfort. Instead, he did what he learned was most vital. He acknowledged the truth of her pain. He spent hours with her, mapping out every entrance and exit of the new house, installing a simple, child-friendly security system she could control, and giving her a dedicated panic button that connected directly to his phone, regardless of where he was. It was a tangible way of giving her back the control that had been stolen. The healing came in slow, fragile waves. There were days where Chloe refused to leave her room, overwhelmed by anxiety and sudden flashbacks to the cabin. But there were also days where her genuine curiosity and light began to return. She enrolled in an art class and discovered a passion for painting abstract, bright canvases, a stark contrast to the darkness she had endured. Julian attended school functions, volunteered for class reading time, and simply prioritized being present. He found that the greatest revenge against Serena and Alex was the sight of Chloe living a normal, happy life, something they had tried to ensure would never happen. Julian's therapy focused heavily on dismantling the mask of the invincible CEO. He'd always believed money and power could solve any problem. This ordeal taught him the vulnerability of the human heart and the limits of wealth against pure malice. He learned to articulate his own pain, the fear of dying and leaving his daughter alone, and the crushing guilt over the elaborate deception he had to maintain. One significant challenge was their relationship with time. Chloe, due to the stolen 6 months, was acutely aware of every passing day. Julian felt an urgent need to cram years of happiness into a few months, resulting in overscheduling and forced fun. Their therapist helped them find a balance, focusing on the quality of the moment, not the quantity of time lost. It was a process of learning to trust the future again. One Saturday afternoon, several months into their new life, Chloe approached her father as he was reading on the porch. "Daddy," she asked, her voice calm, "do you ever think about them?" Julian closed the financial journal he was reading. He anticipated this question. "I think about what they did," I admitted honestly. "The poison, the cage, the lie. But I don't spend my time thinking about them. They are gone from our lives. They are where they belong." Chloe sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I don't harbor hatred anymore," she considered. I feel cheated out of those 6 months. I wish we could have that time back." Julian gently squeezed her shoulder. "They were attempting to steal your future, Chloe. They tried to steal my very life, but we reclaimed it. Every single day we are together now is a definitive victory. Every new memory we create is time they can never, ever corrupt." He spoke of his cousin Alex only once more, years later. Alex, serving his lifetime sentence, had tried to send a letter of apology, a desperate plea for forgiveness. Julian had burned the letter, unopened. The concept of forgiveness was reserved for those who had simply wronged him, not those who had sought to annihilate his family. He held no hate, only an absolute and final severance. The wound was closed, the scar a permanent reminder, but the connection was broken forever.
The legal proceedings against Serena and Alex culminated in a devastating televised verdict. The mountain of evidence, the audio confessions, the video surveillance, and Chloe's haunting testimony left the jury with no doubt. Both were convicted on all counts, receiving maximum sentences that ensured they would spend the remainder of their lives in a federal correctional facility. The media declared the case closed, a cautionary tale of greed and familial destruction. For Julian and Chloe, however, the real closure was an internal, far quieter process. The revenge, in the end, was not the courtroom spectacle or the finality of the prison sentences. The true vengeance was Chloe's quiet graduation from therapy, her return to school where she thrived, and the sight of her genuine, easy smile. The revenge was embodied in Julian's decision to fund the creation of the Chloe Maxwell Survivor Fund, dedicated to assisting other Black children victimized by sophisticated family betrayals and domestic violence, a powerful and enduring rebuke to his betrayers.
This foundation was not a monument to wealth, but a perpetual mechanism of defiance, using the very resources Alex and Serena coveted to save the lives they had tried to extinguish. Years unfolded. Chloe blossomed into a confident, profoundly intelligent young woman. The trauma became an integrated component of her character, the resilience in her backbone, not the anchor dragging her down. She excelled in her studies, channeling her experience into a quiet, focused determination. She chose to pursue a career in corporate law, inspired by Ray Vance. Driven by an unwavering conviction that justice must be pursued, even when it requires confronting profound personal darkness. She understood that power, when wielded ethically, was the strongest form of protection. Julian, watching her grow, understood his initial perception of revenge had been immature. He had sought simple, brutal retribution. Chloe taught him that true vengeance was the active creation of a meaningful life in the face of annihilation. He restructured Maxwell Ventures not for expansion, but for stability, ensuring his legacy was secure and ethical. He devoted significant time to the foundation, finding a purpose that eclipsed the pursuit of wealth. He revisited the cemetery one final time, alone. He stood where the false grave had been, now a simple, flat patch of grass. He didn't feel anger or sadness, only a quiet, resolute peace. The marble had been replaced, not with another stone, but with a deep-rooted sense of gratitude. The lie was gone, and the truth of his daughter's survival was the greatest marker he needed. One evening, just before she departed for her final year of law studies, Chloe and Julian stood on the terrace of their secluded home, watching the sun disappear. The house was calm, filled with the comfortable silence of years of shared memories. "I will be a powerful advocate, Daddy," she promised, her voice clear and strong. "I will make certain that people like Serena and Alex are stopped long before they can destroy others. I will use the law to protect the vulnerable." Julian smiled, his face aged by time, but his eyes radiating profound, unshakable peace. "You have already succeeded, Chloe," he told her. "You succeeded the moment you stepped out from behind that oak tree. You succeeded when you compelled me to live, when I was prepared to embrace death. You didn't just survive the nightmare, you utilized that trauma to save me." He took her hands in his, the very same small hands that had shattered the lie on the gravestone. "You came back for me," Julian concluded, his voice a low, sacred promise. "And because you returned, my life will continue. That is their final, absolute defeat." They stood united, father and daughter, bound by a shared history of profound darkness and an unyielding commitment to a future of light. The shadow of their past was permanently eclipsed by the immense, quiet dignity of their ongoing survival. The legacy of Julian Maxwell was no longer about his wealth, but about the unbreakable fortitude of a Black family and the impossible, ultimate revenge achieved through the sheer will to live, love, and protect. Their story was no longer about falling, but about rising, stronger and more unified than ever before. They were survivors, builders, and silent victors in a war of the heart.